As I was saying, the developments of the covert fifth column in the modern age, with all of its technological, methodological augmentation, most of which are covertly enabled, which means their effects with regard to a previous status quo go undisclosed to those who are affected by them. In a generation or two, the former status quo becomes annihilated even in the memories of those who experience them, especially as their numbers dwindle and they get absorbed into the new social, ever more engineered human stew, which passes for a society. But however, human nature doesn't fundamentally change and is still, by the same means, corruptible and malleable to corruption through coercion of various kinds. And if you think about any, for example, bribes, if you think about what a bribe is, in most cases, you might be inclined to think of it as someone giving something that they themselves possess or offering it to someone in order to convince them to do something that would be preferred, that is probably not proper. That's why it's a bribe and not merely just an offering of payment for a service or a good. Asking for something inappropriate through some kind of reward being offered is a bribe. You think about most of the time, those who are offering bribes, they're not private individuals, and oftentimes even if they are, it's probably through some ill-gotten gain that they're funding their bribes and getting people on their payrolls. For example, we already know the counterfeit racketeering program of the Federal Reserve and of the old school royal, as it were, elite, pseudo-royal elite, pseudo-elite. Their influence having been hard won through all those centuries of murder, assassination, poisoning, treachery, bullying, browbeating, pulpit pounding, torturing, massacring, or threatening with these, which the threat is often stronger and more useful than the execution. But oftentimes it's backed up by the actual thing enough, and that's where it gets its credibility. And then, of course, the propaganda platforms do a lot of the work now. Psychotronics can augment these processes and make them exponentially more effective. So the bribes and the threats, the persuasion and the through fallacious and illegitimate forms of pseudo-argument and manipulative and invalid reasoning, and of course the drugging and chemically and the chemical assault of the public and of victims and members of the public who are specifically targeted. All these processes are much more effective when done covertly, and especially when it's not, it may perhaps not covertly, but it is legitimized falsely, such as with psychiatry and its so-called treatments of so-called mental illnesses. Not that there can't be such a thing as a mental illness, it's just that their means of defining mental illness, as Thomas Saz well illustrates for us, is deficient in objectivity or relevance to referring properly to an actual condition of a person that could be addressed, let's just say professionally and properly by anything resembling a physician or a true professional concerned with the well-being of a patient or a client. And the types of treatments that we've seen them use since Bedlam and before, all the way until Morgan Freeman, Dr. Freeman's lobotomobile, and it's a hideous travesty to look at it, and it's known that psychiatry has been used as actually an instrument of legitimizing the containment and the neutralization of people who do not properly fit in according to the plans, or who do not rub well with the agendas of the corrupt power elite. It's incredible that anybody thinks it's deniable as a fact. Historically, it's fact. Art, cinema, all allude to it or directly refer to it as the fact that it is. Again, for all these types of assertions I'm making, I'm relying on the audience's good faith and their own background knowledge and their own willingness to do research and just their willingness to think critically about it for themselves. And I'm sure they'll come to the same conclusion in proportion of their research and consideration of the matter. But I'd love to go further into examples in each case. I would really love to make, in every single assertion I make, I could make a whole hour-long video demonstrating it with empirical facts, either drawn from documentation or from just actual instances of the matter that I'm discussing. But I couldn't possibly do that in this video without it spiraling off constantly into every subtopic that I mentioned. I got to stay on the topic of the covert fifth column. It's the most crucial element. In fact, I'm not even, if you've noticed, I'm not even going into the moral or the Gnostic aspects of the evaluation of this phenomenon, but I'm talking about the phenomenon in a sort of secular, naturalistic way, in order to give a description of it that is as streamlined as possible and as neutral as possible to the consideration of the intellect. But I can go into those other dimensions of evaluation and analysis as well in a separate series of videos. Of course, my situation, where I'm at here now, complicates the matter, makes it difficult to really sit down and do the hard-nosed scholarly work. I'm having to use cafes, restaurants, or any site where I can get away with making videos in the first place, or doing my reading and research. Just recently here where I'm at now, I was assaulted by a weaponized bum, basically. These guys are just, I guess they just bust them in. Some of them are native or indigenous, but it seems like they're getting bussed in from the West Coast and other areas. I don't know how to. I can't be sure in each case, but the impression is I'm seeing new batches every few months. Sometimes not even trickling in, coming in en masse, and I'm seeing some elements trickle out. It's like they get worn out, or they get redeployed, or they go on leave from their fifth column duties. Maybe all the above. I don't know how much of it is sort of spontaneous with psychotronics dovetailing in. I don't know how many of these incidents or persons, agents, are acting on behalf of someone else. I don't know what the particular bribe is, whether it's money, a pat on the back, an attaboy, a little plastic bag of drugs, promise that they'll be given a job or involvement in some special fifth column element. I don't know. I'd have to take each one and chain them up and interrogate them, which obviously I can't do, or it would be illegal for me to do that unless I were deputized for that purpose. A sort of counterintelligence unit could be set up for dealing with this covert fifth column and neutralizing it from the head down, which would be the only real way to neutralize it. And that would have, honestly, I'm going to tell you, it would have to start with disabling the psychotronics control grid, because that system doesn't just dovetail in and modify neuropsychological processes. Often, well, it depends on the parameters of the program that's controlling it and per the targeted individual or group. But it can be dovetailed in with what is considered a proper psychological profile of that individual group, so that its influences may be undetectable as influences by the targeted individual group. They may feel unduly X, Y, or Z, but it could be often said that X, Y, and Z were typical of that person to a lesser degree, and who's to say what the cause was for the difference on that day or at that time. Especially if no one even knows that psychotronics exists, or that it's being covertly deployed in the urban infrastructure. Wi-Fi, the GWEN towers, ground wave emergency network towers, the microwave communications arrays for cellular phones, smartphones, to the Wi-Fi networks, basically through the really through the electrical wiring of the entire city and all of its buildings, because the electrical fields can carry piggyback frequencies and distribute them and emit them in an area. There's also scalar interferometric standing waves, which can be deployed by HARP and micro HARP systems. I'm sure they've miniaturized it by now. There's a lot that I know that I don't know. So just imagine that I know is there in some form, probably based on what we know that we know. To borrow a Rumsfeld sort of what do you say it? A Rumsfeldism. There's a lot that we know that we don't know, but that we can predict would be something like a geometric progression from what we know. And then there's what we don't know that we don't know, which could be many times worse, and will be. And all those aspects have their direct influence, which is impacting and substantive, and then the indirect from the fact that they're covert, because cognitive dissonance cannot gain traction very well in most cases. There's so many aspects to it. So whatever the motive is, whatever the causative etiology in each case, it's to the point where it's actually difficult to function at all. I'm surprised I get anything done. It's a harassment program that comes in many forms, and its mechanics are subtle. Yeah. Thank you, Ann. Are diverse, but should be diverse, because the effectiveness comes in a multi-vectoral approach. If any vector is overloaded, discernible deformations in the process it affects can be found by various persons in the environment, and the NSA refers to these issues in their latest research, along with DARPA, as the nature of how information leaks can be detected, and how important it is that those leaks be sealed up. But that there's something about the way that the dampening or covering or protection or encryption of information leads to certain kind of biases in its detection by third parties, and also investigation into those leads to certain biases in its detectability and detection by those who are controlling the information. And these are considerations that can be mathematically analyzed very precisely, apparently, according to their own research. So they're formulating ways to automatize the efficiency of all their constructs. They can use supercomputers to model these things. It's not outside the realm of possibility, even remotely. They boast about it in journals, which most people are oblivious to the existence of or ever read. Even the synopses of these papers, they could care less. They're more fascinated with what Bart Simpson has to say this week than what the Journal of Neuroscience or Cognitive Science or any other journal of science or technology has to say about what's going on. But they could model these things precisely enough. I'm sure it's evident that their focus is on removing traces of information that reveal any outside influence of an event. That way they have plausible deniability to the maximum degree, so that scripted events can pass as unscripted. That's the key. going black, going as covert as possible is the key. It's the key to their power. Jim Marrs talks about it, rule by secrecy. I've been talking about it this entire video series concerning how, in essence, from the beginning, espionage was the technique of consolidating power. The king's eyes, ears, mouth, and hands, basically. His surveillance, covert propaganda, and covert sabotage, assassination, and other manipulation agents and methodologies. Given these circumstances, I can't go further into detail too much into any given subtopic, nor even properly prepare for that. It's a wonder I get as much done as I do. But what I can tell you is that it's getting worse and worse exponentially because their hand is being forced. There are instabilities, and not just in the system itself and in circumstances in it and surrounding it, but there may be the outside forces, which I also will refrain from speaking of here, are no doubt taking care of their business too. So my effort is to expose it as much as possible, to just lay it bare, because it thrives in darkness, and it thrives in people looking the other way, and it thrives in the anesthetization of conscience, original and real, or secondary and derived. But whether first or second order morality is the cause of someone's conscience, operative or genuinely qualitative, doesn't matter. The result is the same if one is not faced with the phenomenon, if one cannot confront it ethically or cognitively, let alone ethically. There are various ways that could be circumvented without someone directly laying it bare, exposing it. Intuition, gnosis, spontaneous or cultivated. Sometimes there are circumstances that arise that are either unpredicted or unpredictable, even by their quantum supercomputing arrays and their demonic dark arts can only go so far. And those aspects, those leakages, are what they're focused on controlling. Now, covert fifth columnry extends toward specifically controlling and consolidating, enhancing the power structure, and in its corruption. Of course, what we'll find is that it becomes something other than just a perfunctory necessity for the power elite, but becomes a choice weapon, because the truth cannot be confronted in broad daylight or openly, because it will be the victor every time, unless people are thoroughly uninfatuated with the truth, which can be the case too. After a certain point, though, if it's consistently allowed the light of day in a confrontation with its opposite, the falsehood, it will win. So, given the corruption that's involved in these now modern, ultra augmented, technologically ramified systems of control, the war that they're waging is on the exposure of any truth, if possible. One truth leads to another. One contradiction of a lie leads to another. So it's a constant war against truth. It's the minimization of truthful and meaningful communication in society, or even the existence of the human person, who's been truncated down, whittled down to a kind of homunculus of crudity and barbarous insincerity. It's just the various ways of wearing them down are in the conventional forms are worth going into, but they provide the background for the modern methodology, which has been
made possible by instant communication, thorough and very advanced forms of encryption, mathematical modeling, and the devising of algorithms, the ability to automatize and use artificial intelligence to regulate these systems, bringing the human element more and more out of the direct picture of the infrastructure of these manipulations so that there's less human error, as it were. Also less sandbagging, which is when someone involved in an operation or a scheme kind of sabotages it because they don't agree with it or because their conscience prohibits it, but yet they continue playing along like they're, the foot dragging is an example of that. So that circumstance brings us to the point of needing to focus on especially what the fifth columns are up to right now. The classical forms of coercing society and groups and individuals in it to fit the agenda of the corrupt power elite is a whole subject worth going into in more detail. But what's especially important is that the augmentations to those classical systems have also are exponentially more severe and impacting than their predecessors in what they augment and catalyze. Moreover, they have bred new systems that were unthinkable in the past, that would look like witchcraft or some other form of just sorcery or miraculous intervention of some kind. And these need to be explained, and I'm going to come at this from various angles that all integrate into that explanation. As indicated, the methods of the power elite have always been, in fact, forms of warfare conducted against their own populations in order to consolidate and maintain power. And if you think about how warfare normally manifests, that's exactly what it is. It's an attempt to ensure power over the targeted entity or group or individual, to defeat the other or neutralize them so that one's power is assured, so that one's own freedom to act, one's own ability to pursue goals and agendas is less restrained by the presence of possible resistance, especially organized, intelligent resistance. So one of the chief aspects of success in war has been to avoid relying on any sort of merely direct conflict of numbers or direct strength, and to attempt to gain every other advantage under the sun so as to maximize the chance of winning regardless of numbers and strength. Control of information is key to that, so concealing information from the opponent, foe, enemy, as well as gathering information about them, especially that they would like to conceal, are key elements of war strategy, and therefore will be key elements of what's really covert civil warfare strategy of one class over another. So that's always been the case. It's easily demonstrated. Propaganda, control of information, dissemination of information, the analysis of it in favor of an asymmetry which favors the power elite, the controlling structure, is par for the course. This goes beyond just wanting to present a good public image or ensure that one's given proper credit for whatever benefits accrue from one's actions for society, and it goes far beyond avoiding undeserved blame. We're talking about organized crime, basically. Let's assume that in a true war, a true battle, one side is the just and the other is the unjust. One side is doing no wrong to the other, but the other is intent on doing wrong to the former, is the aggressor. In that case, nevertheless, both will rationalize and interpret the other's actions as a crime, something to be fought and defeated, something to be neutralized. And so, in the same case, in the same vein, covert civil warfare programs, which have been ongoing since there ever was a form of power in society that was ever asymmetrical, or that ever involved people vying for an enhancement of their own prospects against one another. Therefore, those can be understood as elements of warfare practiced in a civil environment, and especially in an urban environment. An example of this would be, let's take elements of classical warfare methodology and then import them into a concealed and camouflaged format, as you'd expect from covert civil warfare programs. One would be scouting. Scouting, a key element in gathering intelligence, involves elements that generally are used in the field to gather information while being unseen or undetected, and not even especially not to let the enemy know that information's been gathered about them, because then that would alert them to that fact, or they would become suspicious of that fact, and situation might change drastically from the information that was gathered. Or at the very least, they would be better prepared for any attempts to capitalize on those gains of information. So the elements of scouting involve the ability to find undetected, find enemy forces or targeted forces and assess them, and then return with that information undetected. That's not all they do, but starting with that. So the eyes and ears of a covert fifth column are such that anyone in any area that's operating as part of it, however witting or unwitting they are to the larger scheme, usually unwitting to the larger scheme, and given us a backstory about their involvement as having something to do with national security or the improvement of the safety in their location or locale. Beneficent things like keeping an eye on someone who's suspected of terrorist activities or being a pedophile or whatever else they want to concoct to persuade that particular element, that embedded element, that what it's doing is for the better, and that they're doing society a service, and that they're not harming by their activity a genuine and valid member of society, but someone who is, or at least not someone above reproach or beyond suspicion, but that in fact there's some justifiable reason for this action. This helps motivate them and maintain their diligence about their role as basically a spy. That going on is one element of the process. And can you imagine what it's like if this could be decentralized and in some way through fusion centers, perhaps through collated and integrated dossiers in various intelligence and law enforcement agencies and various social interest groups of every stripe, how that could end up leading toward individuals who could be, basically handed off and targeted by any group and handed off to any other group for any number of reasons, which might be presented as legitimate or might not, but either way may not be legitimate. Nevertheless, this could be going on, and the fact that it would be going on covertly, usually with the targeted person or groups not being aware of it, is a key element of that. This, of course, is technically an illegal activity in most cases, because these people haven't committed a crime, but they're treated as suspects of as having some type of propensity or connection to the possibility of maybe being of the sort of person or who would be motivated or involved in the committing of crimes. But yet, this is exactly what's being conducted against them. and this is how they would see it if they were aware of these processes going on. And as they are aware of it or become aware of it, it does inflict psychological trauma, and it does, whether they're aware of it or not, because we do have sensitive faculties of awareness that go beyond the obvious, and which are being harassed directly by these processes of surveillance. And of course, the panopticonic surveillance grid already in place, supposedly keep everyone safe, the cameras, the drones, the satellites, the smart dust, the microphones, the sensitive sort of photonic radar that's also doubles as a communication medium, depending on the frequency of light and whether or not devices are receptive to that. There are studies in how certain parts of the nervous system and certain cells in the brain can be trained or made susceptible to influence by light that could either go through the optic nerve or just be go through the skull. Radio waves, various types of other directed energy as well. And all these could be grounded by nanotechnological augmentations that are inhaled, say if they were distributed as an aerosol in the sky on a regular basis. Concentrations of soft and hard metals in the body, which would cause it to act as a conductive antenna array for these types of directed energy. All these types of things can be enhanced so that no one vector is over relied on, and hence not too much harm would come of them from any one vector, but the vector product would reveal a lot of information. And it's similar to the method that Royal Raymond Rife used to gather information about one-celled organisms without harming them, but it could be made lethal, could be lethalized. And in fact, the same is true of these directed energy systems. But to get back to the scouting elements, they're also involved in what's called stalking, which means not just to surveil, but also to follow, to inhabit the environment of a targeted person, whether or not as special activity or as something that they fit into their schedule of activities, or something that can just dovetail in with their activities. They can be remunerated directly or indirectly. And all these means of stalking and remuneration are thoroughly already explored on the internet and in various other venues of publication of this information, and the diligent concerned person should just do that research. I'll just say for short, #gangstalking, organized stalking, organized gang stalking,